Just hanging out here, kind of wasting the day away in the quiet, and started thinking maybe it's time to do a couple of videos about some stuff, and thought this would be a good opportunity to address another question. This didn't come from a viewer, but it came from a friend the other night who we were just talking about some beer basics and processes and things, and asked me about what conditioning is. Like, what's the deal with conditioning? What's that process all about? And the fact is it's both simple and very complex. It depends on really how in the weeds you want to get with it. On the very most basic level, conditioning is the process after fermentation where the beer ages for a while, and the yeast will start to crash out of solution or flocculate where it comes out of solution, and the beer starts to clarify a little bit. Some of the flavors in the beer develop a little bit post-fermentation, and it's basically chilled for whatever amount of time. So back when I was running breweries, we would condition for anywhere from 14 to 30 days. 2 weeks, 14 days was pretty standard. Sometimes 21 for a lot of the kind of bigger beers. And then all the lagers were 30 to 45 days. There were some that would go and even beyond that. Some of the barley wines. We had a barley wine that conditioned for a year. And then we bottled it and let it sit for a little bit longer too. And that thing lasted for probably a decade until it really started to fade. But it was a huge, big beer. And the conditioning time is going to depend on a few things. Number one is going to be the type of yeast that's used. So lager yeasts take a lot longer to come out of solution. They also take a little bit longer to condition and for some of those flavors to develop that lagers have, and some of the undesirable flavors to subside. Ales are a lot quicker, and for the most part, ale yeast drop out of solution a lot quicker. It's also going to depend on the temperature that you're using for conditioning. So if you're conditioning at, let's say, 34 degrees, it's going to be a lot different than if you're conditioning at, let's say, 45 degrees, right? Which is probably too high. We conditioned somewhere, well, it depends. Sometimes the room would go up and down depending on the season. But we would go anywhere from like 35 to 40 degrees for conditioning. And what'll happen is the colder it is, the easier it is for the yeast to sort of fall out of solution. It won't stay suspended as much. It certainly won't stay alive and working. It also depends on what the beer is made of, right? Your grain bill, the particulate matter, how clean your transfer was out of fermentation, etc., things like that. It's also going to depend on whether or not you're dry hopping and you have to maybe transfer tanks, or you're waiting for some of the residuals to kind of drop out in sort of a secondary kind of clean off as well. So, there's a few things that are just minutia about that, but for the most part, it's the aging process for beer. Traditionally, beers would age in caves where it was cool, or cellars where it was cool, for months and months, all winter long in some cases, and then they would be brought out in the spring. So that's conditioning in a nutshell.